There is a kind of pain that does not scream. It does not beg for attention. It sits quietly inside the heart, heavy and unspoken. It is the pain of holding on too long, of loving without being met, of enduring situations that slowly drain your spirit. Buddhism teaches that suffering often continues not because life is cruel, but because we resist release. We grip what hurts us, hoping it will change, hoping we will be rewarded for patience, hoping silence will somehow fix what awareness already knows. This teaching is not about running away or becoming cold. It is about learning to let go gently, without drama, without hatred, without announcing your departure. True healing does not need an audience. It begins the moment you choose yourself quietly. 1. Letting go quietly is an act of self-respect. Buddhism reminds us that peace does not arrive through force, confrontation, or dramatic endings. Peace grows slowly and naturally in the spaces where attachment begins to loosen. When you let go quietly, you are not giving up something precious or admitting defeat. You are reclaiming your dignity and restoring balance within yourself. Many people believe that leaving loudly, explaining endlessly, or making their pain visible will bring relief, but often it only deepens the wound. Loud exits usually rise from a wounded ego, from a desperate need to be seen, understood, validated, or proven right. Quiet letting go, on the other hand, comes from inner clarity. It comes from the calm understanding that your worth does not depend on being believed, approved of, or emotionally accommodated by others. When you walk away silently, you are not weak, passive, or afraid. You are grounded. You are choosing stability over chaos. You recognize that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, your emotions, or your healing process. Some people only know how to enter your life to consume, not to nurture. Self-respect is realizing that your heart is not a public space where everyone is allowed to walk freely. It is a sacred place that deserves protection. Choosing peace over proving a point is one of the deepest forms of self-respect. It means you no longer measure your value by how loudly you are heard or how convincingly you can explain your pain. You stop chasing closure from people who are unable or unwilling to give it. You stop rehearsing arguments that change nothing. Instead, you allow your actions to speak quietly through distance, boundaries, and calm withdrawal. This is not bitterness. This is maturity. Buddhism teaches that attachment is one of the main roots of suffering. The tighter we cling to people, outcomes, or expectations, the more pain we experience when life refuses to cooperate. When attachment dissolves, suffering loosens its grip naturally. Letting go quietly does not mean avoiding reality or suppressing emotions. It means acknowledging the truth of what is, without adding extra suffering through resistance, anger, or resentment. You accept that some connections have completed their purpose, and you release them with grace. In this way, letting go quietly becomes wisdom in motion. It is the wisdom of knowing when to step back instead of fighting, when to preserve your energy instead of wasting it, and when to honor your heart instead of betraying it. You do not need applause for choosing yourself. You do not need permission to heal. Your silence becomes a statement of self-respect, and your peace becomes the proof that letting go was the right choice. 2. Healing begins when you stop fighting reality. One of the deepest sources of suffering, according to Buddhism, is not what happens to us, but our resistance to what has already happened. We argue with reality in quiet ways every day. We replay moments in our mind, wishing we had spoken differently, acted sooner, or been treated better. We hold on to the hope that if we think hard enough, explain enough, or wait long enough, reality will change to match our expectations. But healing does not grow in resistance. Healing begins the moment you stop fighting what is and start seeing it clearly. When you stop fighting reality, you are not saying that what happened was right, fair, or painless. You are simply acknowledging that it happened. Buddhism teaches that acceptance is not surrendering your power, it is reclaiming it. As long as you are mentally arguing with the past, your energy remains trapped there. You relive the pain again and again, not because the wound is fresh, but because you keep touching it. Letting go quietly means you gently remove your hand from the wound. You allow it to breathe. You allow it to heal. Many people believe healing requires answers. Why did they change? Why was I not enough? Why did this end the way it did? Buddhism teaches that not every question brings peace. Some questions only deepen attachment and confusion. When you stop fighting reality, you release the need for perfect explanations. You understand that life unfolds through causes and conditions, many of which are outside your control. People act from their own wounds, fears, and limitations. Seeing this clearly softens your heart. It allows compassion to replace bitterness. When resistance ends, the body also begins to relax. The nervous system calms, the mind stops racing. You notice that much of your exhaustion came not from the event itself, but from the constant inner struggle against it. Healing feels lighter when you stop demanding that the past be different. You shift from "this should not have happened" to "this happened, and I am still here." That shift alone restores strength. Letting go quietly at this stage means choosing peace over endless mental battles. You stop punishing yourself for what you could not control. You stop carrying emotional weight that no longer serves your growth. Buddhism reminds us that peace is found in alignment with reality, not in resistance to it. When you accept what is, without resentment or denial, you create space for wisdom to arise naturally. In that space, healing begins not as a forceful effort, but as a gentle return to balance, clarity, and inner calm. 3. Silence is sometimes the deepest form of love. In a world that encourages constant expression, explanation, and reaction, silence is often misunderstood. Many people assume that if you do not speak, confront, or defend yourself, you are weak or afraid. Buddhism offers a very different understanding. It teaches that silence, when chosen consciously, can be one of the most compassionate and powerful responses available to us. Silence is not emptiness. It is awareness. It is the space where wisdom decides whether words are truly necessary. When you let go quietly, silence becomes a form of love directed inward. You stop forcing conversations that only reopen wounds. You stop explaining your pain to people who are not listening with their hearts. You recognize that some words, no matter how carefully spoken, will never reach someone who is emotionally unavailable. Buddhism reminds us that right speech includes knowing when speech will cause more harm than healing. Silence, in this sense, is not avoidance, it is protection. Silence allows emotions to settle without being stirred into conflict. When anger arises, words spoken too quickly often carry the heat of that emotion and create consequences that last far longer than the feeling itself. By choosing silence, you allow emotions to pass through you without being turned into weapons. You give yourself time to observe what you are feeling rather than reacting from it. This creates inner stability. You are no longer controlled by impulse. You are guided by awareness. There is also compassion in silence toward others. Not everyone has the capacity to receive the truth without distortion. Sometimes speaking only feeds defensiveness, denial, or blame. Buddhism teaches that compassion does not mean forcing understanding. It means recognizing limitations with gentleness. When you step back quietly, you allow others to remain where they are without hostility. You release the need to correct, convince, or awaken them. That release is a form of kindness. Silence also protects your healing process. When you announce your pain too early or too loudly, It becomes vulnerable to misunderstanding, judgment, or misuse. Quiet healing allows wounds to close without interference. It creates a safe inner space where reflection, forgiveness, and insight can develop naturally. You begin to hear your own thoughts more clearly. You reconnect with your intuition. Your inner voice grows stronger because it is no longer drowned out by noise. Buddhism teaches that peace often grows in stillness. When you choose silence, you choose depth over drama. You choose calm over chaos. You allow life to move forward without dragging every emotion into the light. Silence becomes a boundary that keeps your heart intact while honoring the truth of what you have experienced. In this way, silence is not absence, it is presence. It is love expressed through restraint, wisdom, and respect for your own inner peace. 4. Detachment is not coldness, it is inner freedom. Many people misunderstand detachment because they view it through the lens of fear. They believe that if they detach, they will become distant, unfeeling, or emotionally numb. Buddhism teaches something very different. Detachment is not about shutting down the heart. It is about freeing the heart from bondage. It is not the absence of love, it is the absence of clinging. When you let go quietly, you are not rejecting connection. You are releasing the unhealthy grip that turns love into suffering. Attachment often disguises itself as loyalty, patience, or devotion. We tell ourselves that staying longer proves our love or our strength. But Buddhism reminds us that when attachment becomes a source of ongoing pain, it is no longer love, it is fear of loss. Detachment begins when you recognize this difference. You see that love can exist without ownership, and care can exist without control. You stop demanding that people, situations, or outcomes remain the same in order for you to feel safe. When detachment develops, inner freedom follows. You no longer live at the emotional mercy of others. Their moods, choices, and limitations stop defining your inner state. This does not mean you stop feeling, it means your feelings no longer dictate your sense of self. You can care deeply and still remain steady. You can love and still walk away when love requires self-abandonment. Buddhism teaches that this balance is wisdom, not indifference. Detachment also changes the way you experience loss. When you cling tightly, loss feels like destruction. When you detach with awareness, loss feels like transition. You understand that everything in life moves through cycles of arising and passing away. Relationships, roles, and identities all have their seasons. Detachment allows you to honor what was without trying to imprison it in the present. You grieve without collapsing. You remember without suffering endlessly. Letting go quietly through detachment means releasing expectations. You stop expecting people to heal your wounds, fulfill your unmet needs, or become who you imagine they could be. You see them as they are, not as you wish them to be. This clarity reduces resentment. It allows compassion to exist without illusion. You no longer personalize every disappointment. You understand that much of life unfolds beyond personal intention. Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes when the mind stops grasping. Detachment loosens the grip of fear, jealousy, and anxiety. It returns you to yourself. You begin to experience a lighter way of being, where joy is no longer dependent on conditions and peace is no longer fragile. This is not coldness, this is liberation. It is the freedom to love without losing yourself, to care without suffering, and to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. 5. You heal faster when you stop explaining yourself. One of the most invisible drains on the human heart is the constant need to explain itself, to explain why you are hurt, to explain why you are leaving, to explain why something that felt unbearable to you did not seem like a big deal to others, Buddhism teaches that much of this urge to explain comes from attachment to being understood. We want our pain to be validated. We want our choices to be justified. We want others to agree that we were right to feel what we felt. But healing does not grow from constant explanation. In fact, the more you explain yourself to the wrong people, the more delayed your healing becomes. When you are wounded, explaining can feel like survival. You replay events in words, hoping someone will finally say, "You were right," or "Your pain makes sense." But Buddhism reminds us that not everyone has the emotional capacity to hold your truth. Some people listen only to defend themselves, others listen only to judge, and some listen just enough to respond, not enough to understand. When you continue explaining yourself to people who are unwilling or unable to truly hear you, you reopen the wound again and again. Each explanation becomes another act of self-exposure without safety. Letting go quietly means recognizing that your healing does not require consensus. You begin to understand that your experience is valid, even if no one else confirms it. This realization is deeply freeing. You stop measuring your recovery by how well others accept your boundaries. You stop negotiating your pain. You stop carrying the burden of making your truth comfortable for others to digest. Buddhism teaches that liberation begins when you stop seeking external approval for internal decisions. There is also a subtle form of self-abandonment hidden inside over-explaining. Each time you justify yourself excessively, you send a quiet message inward that your feelings are not enough on their own, that they need permission, that they need witnesses. Healing accelerates when you reverse this pattern. When you trust yourself enough to say, "I know why I need to leave," and that is sufficient. This trust rebuilds self-respect. It strengthens your inner voice. It teaches your nervous system that you are safe with yourself. Stopping explanation does not mean becoming cold or dismissive. It means becoming selective and wise. Buddhism teaches discernment, not withdrawal from humanity. You learn to share your story with those who listen with compassion, not curiosity. You choose spaces where your vulnerability is met with care, not interrogation. And for everyone else, silence becomes a boundary, a gentle one, but a firm one. You do not owe your emotional history to people who have already shown they cannot hold it responsibly. As you stop explaining yourself, something remarkable happens. Your mind grows quieter. The endless inner rehearsals fade. You stop replaying conversations that will never happen the way you wish they would. You reclaim the energy that was once spent defending your choices. That energy begins to nourish your healing instead. Your body relaxes, your breath deepens, your thoughts slow down. You feel less scattered, less emotionally exposed, less reactive. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found in convincing others, but in aligning with truth. When you stop explaining yourself, you align with your own truth more fully. You allow your actions, boundaries, and silence to speak on your behalf. You trust that what is meant to understand you will understand without force, and what is not meant to stay will fall away naturally. In this way, quiet letting go becomes a profound act of self-love. You no longer argue with the past or defend your right to move forward. You simply move. You heal faster because you are no longer bleeding into conversations that go nowhere. You heal faster because you choose containment over exposure, wisdom over noise, and inner validation over external approval. This is not avoidance. This is emotional maturity. This is the moment you realize that your healing does not need an audience to be real. 6. Love yourself enough to stop self-abandonment. One of the quietest yet most painful forms of suffering is self-abandonment. It does not announce itself loudly. It happens slowly, almost invisibly, each time you silence your needs to keep the peace, each time you ignore your intuition to avoid disappointing someone, Each time you stay in situations that drain you because leaving feels selfish. Buddhism teaches that suffering deepens when we turn away from ourselves. Healing begins the moment we choose to stay present with our own truth, even when it is uncomfortable. Self-abandonment often begins with good intentions. You want to be patient. You want to be understanding. You want to give others the benefit of the doubt. But over time, compassion without boundaries turns into self-neglect. You start to minimize your pain. You tell yourself that it is not that bad, that others have it worse, that you should be grateful instead of honest. Buddhism does not teach denial of suffering, it teaches awareness of it. When you ignore your own suffering, you are not being noble, you are disconnecting from yourself. Loving yourself enough to heal means listening when your body and heart speak. Fatigue, anxiety, resentment, and emotional numbness are not weaknesses, they are signals. They are gentle warnings that something is out of alignment. When you continue to override these signals for the sake of harmony, you slowly lose touch with your inner guidance. Buddhism teaches that wisdom arises from deep listening. When you stop abandoning yourself, you begin to listen again. Letting go quietly is often the moment you stop betraying your inner voice. You realize that staying in pain does not make you loyal, and sacrificing your peace does not make you loving. You understand that true kindness includes yourself. This realization can feel frightening at first, because it challenges old conditioning. Many people are taught that love means endurance, that strength means tolerance, and that leaving means failure. Buddhism gently dissolves these beliefs. It teaches that clinging to what harms you is not strength, it is attachment. When you choose yourself, guilt often appears. You may feel selfish, ungrateful, or unkind. But guilt is often the echo of old patterns breaking apart. It does not mean you are wrong. It means you are changing. Loving yourself enough to heal means allowing this discomfort without turning back. You stay present with the guilt without letting it control your decisions. Over time, the guilt softens and clarity takes its place. As self-abandonment ends, self-trust begins to grow. You start to rely less on external validation and more on inner knowing. You no longer need to be rescued, chosen, or approved of to feel worthy. You choose yourself in small, consistent ways. You rest when you are tired. You say no when something feels wrong. You step back when your peace is at risk. These choices may seem quiet from the outside, but internally they are revolutionary. Buddhism teaches that the relationship you have with yourself shapes every other relationship in your life. When you stop abandoning yourself, you stop attracting situations that require self-betrayal. You no longer settle for emotional crumbs. You begin to recognize what is nourishing and what is not. Healing accelerates because your energy is no longer divided. You are no longer living against yourself. In this way, loving yourself enough to heal is not an act of ego. It is an act of alignment. You are aligning your actions with your inner truth. You are honoring your limits without resentment. You are choosing peace without apology. Letting go quietly becomes the natural outcome of self-respect, awareness, and compassion directed inward. And in that quiet choice, you return home to yourself, no longer abandoned, no longer lost, but deeply present and whole. 7. Peace is found in what you release, not in what you win. Many people spend years believing that peace will arrive after a victory, after the final conversation, after being understood, after proving they were right, after the other person finally apologizes, changes, or realizes what they lost. Buddhism gently dismantles this belief. It teaches that peace does not come from winning emotional battles, it comes from laying them down. As long as you are trying to win, you are still attached, and where attachment remains, suffering continues. Winning often keeps the mind trapped in conflict. You replay moments again and again, imagining better responses, sharper words, stronger boundaries that came too late. You measure your worth by outcomes you can no longer control. Even when you win an argument, the mind stays restless, searching for the next point to defend. Buddhism reminds us that the ego thrives on victory, but the heart heals through release. True peace is quiet. It does not celebrate. It does not need witnesses. Letting go quietly means recognizing that some battles cost more than they give. You begin to see how much energy has been poured into holding on to resentment, justification, and the desire to be right. That energy could have been used to rest, to reflect, to heal. When you release the need to win, you reclaim your time, your breath, and your inner stillness. You stop feeding the story that keeps you awake at night. Buddhism teaches impermanence. Everything that arises will pass. Conflicts, identities, roles, and relationships are all subject to change. When you cling to winning, you cling to something that cannot last. When you release, you align with the natural movement of life. This alignment brings relief. You no longer push against the current. You float. You allow things to move through you instead of lodging inside you. Peace deepens when you stop demanding closure from others. Many people believe closure comes from final words or final explanations. Buddhism teaches that closure is an internal process. It happens when you accept that not every story ends neatly and not every wound receives acknowledgement. You stop waiting for permission to move on. You grant it to yourself. This is not resignation. It is empowerment without aggression. Releasing does not mean forgetting or pretending nothing mattered. It means carrying the memory without carrying the weight. You remember what happened without reliving it emotionally. You honor the lesson without reopening the wound. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is born from experience when attachment to the experience dissolves. You keep the insight and release the pain. This is how suffering transforms into understanding. As you release the need to win, compassion naturally arises. You see more clearly that people act from their own conditioning, fears, and unhealed wounds. This does not excuse harm, but it softens the heart. You stop personalizing everything. You understand that much of what hurt you was never truly about you. This understanding frees you from bitterness. It allows forgiveness to appear quietly, without force. Peace also grows when you release old identities. The identity of the one who was wronged, the one who endured, the one who waited. These identities can become cages if held too tightly. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to self. You are not your past suffering. You are not your role in someone else's story. When you release these identities, you make space for renewal. You allow yourself to become lighter, more fluid, more alive. Letting go quietly at this stage feels different. It is no longer an effort. It is a settling. The body relaxes. The mind stops scanning for threats. The heart no longer tightens at reminders. You notice long stretches of calm where the past does not intrude. This is not numbness. It is freedom. It is the natural result of releasing what no longer needs to be carried. Buddhism teaches that peace is your natural state. It is not something you must earn through endurance or achievement. It returns when the obstacles are removed. Those obstacles are often attachment, resistance, and the desire to win. When you release them, peace does not arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly, like a soft breath after holding tension for too long. In the end, you realize that nothing essential was ever lost by letting go. What fell away was what weighed you down. What remained was clarity, compassion, and inner stability. You did not need to win to heal. You needed to release. And in that release, you discover a deeper strength, one that does not argue, does not chase, and does not cling. It simply rests. This is the peace Buddhism points toward. Not loud, not proud, but deep, steady, and unshakable. 8. Healing deepens when you trust the quiet process. Modern life teaches us to heal loudly and quickly. Share your pain, announce your boundaries, prove your growth. Measure recovery by visible milestones. Buddhism offers a gentler, truer path. It teaches that the deepest healing often happens quietly, beyond performance, beyond timelines, beyond explanation. When you trust the quiet process, you stop forcing your recovery to look a certain way. You allow healing to unfold at its own pace, guided by awareness rather than urgency. Quiet healing begins with patience. Not the kind of patience that suppresses feelings, but the kind that allows them to move naturally. Emotions arise, peak, and dissolve when they are not resisted or dramatized. When you trust the process, you stop trying to rush yourself into being over it. You stop comparing your timeline to others. Buddhism teaches impermanence, reminding us that everything changes when conditions are allowed to do their work. Healing is not a switch you flip, it is a rhythm you learn to follow. Trusting the quiet process also means turning inward. Instead of constantly seeking reassurance from others, you learn to listen to yourself. You notice subtle shifts, a longer pause before reacting, a softer response to old triggers, a moment of calm where anxiety used to live. These changes may be invisible to others, but they are powerful. Buddhism values inner transformation over outer display. What matters is not how healed you appear, but how gently you now meet your own experience. There is courage in choosing quiet. Loud healing often hides a fear of being unseen. Quiet healing trusts that truth does not need to shout. You begin to release the need to narrate your growth or defend your boundaries. You understand that not everyone needs to understand your process for it to be real. Buddhism teaches right effort, doing what is necessary without excess. Quiet healing is right effort applied to the heart. As you trust the process, you also learn to work skillfully with pain. Pain is no longer an enemy to defeat, but a teacher to listen to. You observe it without judgment. You notice where it lives in the body. You breathe with it instead of bracing against it. This mindful presence softens pain's intensity. It stops being a constant alarm and becomes information. Buddhism teaches mindfulness not as control, but as intimacy with what is present. Through this intimacy, pain loses its power to dominate. Trusting the quiet process requires letting go of the idea that healing must be linear. Some days you feel light and clear. Other days, old memories resurface without warning. Buddhism teaches that this is natural. The mind revisits what is unresolved until it is met with understanding. When you trust the process, you stop interpreting setbacks as failures. You see them as invitations to deepen compassion for yourself. Each return to the wound is another opportunity to meet it with greater wisdom than before. Quiet healing also reshapes your relationship with time. You stop counting how long it has been since the pain began. You stop waiting for a future version of yourself to arrive and make everything better. You begin to inhabit the present moment more fully. Buddhism teaches that liberation is found here, not later. When you trust the process, you realize that healing is not a destination. It is a way of relating to each moment with honesty and care. As the process continues, attachment loosens almost without effort. You notice that you think less about what happened. When you do remember, the memory carries less charge. The story no longer defines you. Buddhism teaches non-attachment, not as detachment from life, but as freedom within it. You are engaged without being entangled. You can care without clinging. This freedom feels subtle at first, but it accumulates quietly, like water shaping stone. Trusting the quiet process also means honoring rest. Healing requires pauses. It requires moments of stillness where nothing is fixed or improved. Buddhism does not glorify constant striving. It honors balance. When you allow yourself to rest, you communicate safety to your nervous system. The body learns that it no longer needs to stay on alert. This sense of safety accelerates healing more than any forced effort ever could. Over time, compassion becomes your natural response, both toward yourself and others. Not because you force forgiveness, but because understanding grows. You see more clearly the conditions that shaped your experience. You recognize suffering without personalizing it. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises when wisdom matures. As you trust the quiet process, wisdom matures steadily, without spectacle. Eventually, you realize that healing has already happened in many small ways. You move through your days with more ease. You choose differently. You breathe more deeply. You recover more quickly when pain arises. There is less urgency, less noise, less inner conflict. This is the fruit of quiet trust, not dramatic, not announced, but deeply real. In trusting the quiet process, you learn a final, essential truth. Healing does not require your constant supervision. When you create the conditions of awareness, compassion, and patience, healing knows how to proceed. You simply stay present. You keep releasing what no longer serves. And life, moving at its own wise pace, meets you there with calm, clarity, and a peace that no longer depends on outcomes. 9. When you let go quietly, you return to yourself. There comes a moment in deep healing when you realize that letting go was never really about another person, another situation, or another chapter of your life. It was always about returning to yourself. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins when we lose connection with our true nature and mistake external attachments for inner stability. When you let go quietly, without drama or resistance, something profound happens. The noise fades, the constant emotional pulling outward softens, and slowly, gently, you begin to feel yourself again. For a long time, much of your energy may have been invested outside of you. You were thinking about what went wrong, what could have been different, what someone else should have done, or what you should have said. Your attention lived in the past or the imagined future. Buddhism teaches that the mind suffers most when it leaves the present moment. Letting go quietly is the act of bringing your attention back home, back to your breath, back to your body, back to the simple experience of being alive right now. Returning to yourself does not happen all at once. It unfolds in quiet ways. You notice that you wake up one morning and the heaviness feels slightly lighter. You go through a day without replaying the same memory over and over. You laugh without guilt. You rest without explaining why. These moments may seem small, but they are signs of deep inner realignment. Buddhism teaches that transformation is rarely sudden. It is the result of consistent, gentle awareness applied over time. When you let go quietly, you stop living through other people's expectations and begin listening to your own inner guidance again. You start to recognize what feels right and what feels draining. You trust your discomfort instead of overriding it. You no longer force yourself to fit into spaces that require you to shrink, silence yourself, or abandon your truth. This reconnection restores self-trust, which is one of the most important foundations of healing. Returning to yourself also means reclaiming your emotional autonomy. You stop allowing others' moods, opinions, or actions to dictate your inner state. Buddhism teaches equanimity, the ability to remain steady regardless of external conditions. This steadiness does not come from control, but from release. When you let go of the need to manage how others see you or respond to you, your inner world becomes more stable. You feel less reactive, less anxious, less pulled in many directions. As you return to yourself, you begin to experience solitude differently. Solitude no longer feels like loneliness or punishment. It becomes nourishment. You enjoy your own presence. Silence feels comforting rather than empty. Buddhism teaches that when the mind is no longer crowded with craving and aversion, stillness becomes a source of joy. You realize that you do not need constant stimulation or validation to feel whole. Being with yourself is enough. This return also brings clarity about your values. You see more clearly what truly matters to you, not what you were taught to prioritize, but what aligns with your inner peace. You become more intentional with your time, your energy, and your relationships. Buddhism teaches mindful living, where actions arise from awareness rather than habit. Letting go quietly clears the fog, so that mindful choices become natural instead of forced. With this clarity comes forgiveness, not as a command, but as a consequence. You forgive not because you are told to, but because holding on no longer makes sense. You see that resentment keeps you tied to the past. Buddhism teaches that forgiveness is a form of release, not approval. When you return to yourself, you choose freedom over bitterness. You loosen the grip of old stories and allow them to fade without resistance. Returning to yourself also means embracing imperfection. You stop demanding that your healing be flawless. You allow yourself to feel tender, uncertain, or vulnerable without judgment. Buddhism teaches compassion toward all experiences, including the difficult ones. You learn to meet yourself with the same kindness you once reserved for others. This self-compassion deepens healing in ways effort never could. Over time, you notice that your identity shifts. You are no longer defined by what you endured or what you lost. You are defined by presence, by awareness, by the quiet strength that comes from knowing you can face life without clinging. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to identity, reminding us that we are not fixed stories. Letting go quietly allows you to step out of old roles and into a more fluid, authentic way of being. In returning to yourself, you discover that peace was never something missing. It was something covered by noise, attachment, and fear. As those layers fall away, peace reveals itself naturally. It does not need to be chased or protected aggressively. It simply remains, steady and available. When you let go quietly, you do not disappear. You arrive. You arrive fully in your own life, grounded, aware, and whole. This is the deepest healing Buddhism points toward. Not becoming someone new, but remembering who you were before the weight of holding on pulled you away from yourself. 10. Letting go quietly is how you learn to live again. There is a stage of healing where you realize that letting go quietly is not only about ending pain, but about rediscovering life itself. For a long time, your world may have felt narrow, defined by what hurt, what failed, or what you lost. Buddhism teaches that suffering shrinks the field of awareness. When the mind is caught in attachment and resistance, it circles the same territory again and again, unable to move freely. Letting go quietly expands that field. It creates space for life to re-enter in subtle, nourishing ways. Living again does not begin with excitement or certainty. It begins with openness. When you stop clinging to the past and stop bracing against the future, the present moment becomes available. You start noticing ordinary things with fresh attention, the way light enters a room, the rhythm of your breath, the simple satisfaction of completing a small task. Buddhism teaches mindfulness not as a technique, but as a way of inhabiting life fully. Letting go quietly restores this ability. You are no longer consumed by what was or what should be. You are here. As you learn to live again, your relationship with fear changes. Fear once kept you attached, convincing you that holding on was safer than releasing. Buddhism teaches that fear often arises from misperceiving impermanence as threat rather than truth. When you let go quietly, you begin to trust impermanence. You see that change does not always destroy. Often, it renews. This trust softens fear's grip. You become more willing to step forward without guarantees, guided by awareness rather than anxiety. Living again also means allowing joy to return without suspicion. After deep pain, joy can feel unfamiliar or even undeserved. You may hesitate to enjoy moments of peace, waiting for them to be taken away. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to pleasure as well as pain, not to reject joy, but to experience it without clinging. Letting go quietly allows joy to arise naturally. You enjoy without gripping. You smile without fear. You understand that joy, like everything else, is part of life's flow. As life returns, creativity often follows. When the mind is no longer consumed by conflict, energy becomes available for expression. You may feel drawn to create, to learn, to explore in ways that were impossible before. Buddhism teaches that when craving and aversion subside, clarity and creativity emerge. Letting go quietly removes inner obstacles, allowing curiosity to lead. You try new things not to escape pain, but because life feels open again. Your sense of purpose also evolves. Purpose no longer needs to be dramatic or externally validated. It becomes quiet and intimate. Buddhism teaches right livelihood and right action, emphasizing alignment with values rather than achievement. As you let go quietly, you begin to act from a place of inner coherence. Your choices reflect who you are now, not who you were trying to be for others. This alignment brings a sense of meaning that does not depend on outcomes. Living again includes learning to trust relationships differently. You no longer enter connections seeking completion or rescue. You come as a whole person, aware of your boundaries and needs. Buddhism teaches interdependence without attachment. Letting go quietly teaches you how to relate without losing yourself. You can be close without merging, caring without clinging. Relationships become places of shared presence rather than emotional survival. As you live again, you also make peace with uncertainty. Buddhism teaches that certainty is an illusion the mind craves to feel safe. Letting go quietly loosens this craving. You learn to live with questions unanswered and paths unfolding. This acceptance brings calm. You are no longer waiting for life to stabilize before engaging with it. You engage as it is, fluid and unpredictable. Living again means honoring rest as much as action. After releasing long-held tension, the body and mind need gentleness. Buddhism values balance, reminding us that effort without rest leads to imbalance. Letting go quietly includes learning when to pause, when to stop striving, and when to simply be. These pauses deepen integration. They allow healing to settle into the nervous system, becoming embodied rather than conceptual. As this way of living stabilizes, gratitude emerges naturally. Not forced gratitude that denies pain, but quiet appreciation for resilience, clarity, and presence. Buddhism teaches gratitude as awareness of interconnectedness. You recognize how many conditions supported your healing, seen and unseen. This recognition humbles and steadies the heart. It keeps you grounded in reality rather than entitlement or despair. Ultimately, letting go quietly teaches you how to live without constant defense. You are no longer guarding old wounds or anticipating new ones. You respond instead of react. You meet life with curiosity instead of fear. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not escape from life, but full participation without bondage. Letting go quietly is the doorway to this participation. In learning to live again, you understand that healing was never about returning to who you were before the pain. It was about becoming present to who you are now. You carry wisdom where wounds once lived. You move with softness where rigidity once ruled. Life does not become perfect, but it becomes workable, meaningful, and deeply alive. This is the quiet miracle of letting go. Without announcement, without force, you step back into your own life. You breathe, you engage, you live. And in this living, shaped by awareness and compassion, you discover that healing was not an end point, but a beginning. 11. Letting go quietly is how wisdom takes root in your life. There is a stage of healing that feels less emotional and more spacious, less urgent and more grounded. It is the stage where wisdom begins to take root, not as an idea you understand, but as a way you live. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is not something you collect. It is something that matures when attachment loosens and awareness deepens. Letting go quietly is the condition that allows this maturation to happen. Without noise, without force, without the need to convince anyone, insight settles into the body and becomes guidance. Wisdom grows when you stop reacting to every inner movement. Earlier in the journey, emotions may have felt overwhelming, pulling you into loops of thought and feeling. Letting go quietly does not erase emotions, but it changes your relationship to them. You begin to observe rather than obey. You notice anger arise and pass without turning it into a story. You feel sadness without drowning in it. Buddhism teaches mindful awareness, the ability to witness experience without being carried away by it. As this awareness strengthens, wisdom emerges naturally. You see more clearly what leads to peace and what leads to suffering, not in theory, but in lived experience. As wisdom takes root, you become less interested in judgment, both toward yourself and others. Judgment requires rigid views. Wisdom allows flexibility. You understand that people act from their conditioning, just as you once did. This understanding does not excuse harm, but it removes the need to personalize it. Letting go quietly softens the heart without weakening discernment. You can recognize what is unhealthy without hatred. You can set boundaries without resentment. Buddhism teaches the middle way, a path between indulgence and suppression, between clinging and rejection. Wisdom lives in this balance. Letting go quietly also reshapes how you relate to effort. Earlier, healing may have felt like work, something you had to push through. Wisdom reveals when effort is helpful and when it becomes another form of grasping. Buddhism teaches right effort, which is not about doing more, but about doing what is appropriate. Sometimes this means engaging actively, other times it means stepping back and allowing life to unfold. When wisdom takes root, you sense the difference intuitively. You stop forcing progress. You trust timing. This trust brings ease. As wisdom matures, your sense of identity becomes lighter. You no longer cling tightly to who you think you are or who you were supposed to be. Buddhism teaches non-self, not as a denial of individuality, but as freedom from rigid self-concepts. Letting go quietly loosens the grip of identity stories that once confined you. You are no longer only the one who suffered, the one who endured, or the one who healed. You are simply present, responsive, and alive. This fluidity allows you to adapt to life without constant inner conflict. Wisdom also changes how you listen. You listen more deeply to others because you are no longer busy preparing responses or defending positions. You listen to yourself with greater honesty, recognizing subtle signals before they become crises. Buddhism teaches that wisdom listens before it acts. Letting go quietly cultivates this listening. You pause more naturally. You feel into situations before moving. This pause is not hesitation. It is clarity gathering itself. As wisdom takes root, compassion becomes steady rather than dramatic. You no longer swing between intense empathy and emotional exhaustion. Compassion becomes sustainable. Buddhism teaches compassion grounded in wisdom, which means caring without losing balance. Letting go quietly supports this balance. You offer kindness without trying to save or fix. You help where you can and accept limits where you cannot. This steadiness protects both you and others from burnout. Wisdom also brings a new relationship with silence. Silence is no longer something you endure or use defensively. It becomes fertile ground. In silence, insights arise unforced. You notice patterns you once missed. You recognize attachments you did not know you were carrying. Buddhism values silence as a teacher. Letting go quietly creates inner silence where wisdom can speak without interruption. This wisdom is not loud. It arrives as a simple knowing, a gentle adjustment in how you move through the world. As wisdom deepens, gratitude becomes less conditional. You are grateful not only for what is pleasant, but for what has shaped you. Buddhism teaches that wisdom sees value in all experiences without clinging to them. Letting go quietly allows you to hold your past with appreciation rather than pain. You see how difficulty refined your discernment and softened your heart. This gratitude is calm and grounded. It does not deny suffering, but it no longer resists it. Wisdom taking root also means recognizing when to engage and when to release. You become less entangled in other people's dramas and more attentive to your own alignment. Buddhism teaches wise association, choosing environments that support clarity rather than confusion. Letting go quietly guides you toward this wisdom. You sense when conversations drain you and when they nourish you. You choose simplicity over stimulation. This choice creates stability. Over time, wisdom expresses itself through consistency rather than intensity. You live your values quietly. You act with integrity even when no one is watching. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is evident in conduct, not in words. Letting go quietly allows your actions to align with understanding. You do less explaining and more embodying. This embodiment feels natural, not performative. As wisdom takes root, fear loses much of its influence. Fear thrives on uncertainty and attachment. Wisdom recognizes uncertainty as inherent and attachment as optional. Buddhism teaches that wisdom sees things as they are, impermanent and interconnected. Letting go quietly aligns you with this view. You become less afraid of change because you trust your capacity to meet it. This trust brings courage without aggression. Eventually, you realize that letting go quietly was not a single act, but an ongoing practice. Each day offers opportunities to release small attachments, to soften resistance, to choose awareness over habit. Wisdom grows through these daily choices. Buddhism teaches that the path is walked moment by moment. Letting go quietly keeps you on this path without strain. In the end, wisdom taking root feels like steadiness. You are less easily shaken. You respond rather than react. You live with clarity without rigidity. This wisdom does not separate you from life. It integrates you more fully into it. You are present, engaged, and at ease with impermanence. Letting go quietly has done its work. It has created the conditions for wisdom to grow, not as something you possess, but as something you live. 12. Letting go quietly is how you learn to trust life again. There is a deep wound that forms when life disappoints us repeatedly. It is not always dramatic or obvious. It shows up as caution, control, emotional guarding, and a quiet belief that trusting again is dangerous. Buddhism understands this wound well. It teaches that when attachment is broken suddenly or painfully, the mind often responds by tightening, trying to prevent future suffering through vigilance and control. Letting go quietly is how this tightening slowly releases. It is how trust, not blind trust, but grounded trust, begins to return. Trusting life again does not mean pretending that pain never happened. It means no longer organizing your entire existence around preventing it from happening again. For a long time, you may have lived defensively, scanning for signs, anticipating loss, preparing for disappointment before it arrives. Buddhism teaches that this constant anticipation is itself a form of suffering. It keeps the nervous system activated and the heart partially closed. Letting go quietly allows the body to stand down from this constant alertness. It signals that you are no longer living inside the memory of the wound. When you let go quietly, you stop trying to control outcomes. Control often feels like safety, but Buddhism reveals it as fear disguised as strategy. You try to manage how things unfold, how people respond, how situations resolve. But life does not move according to personal preference. It moves according to causes and conditions far beyond any one individual. Trusting life again means accepting this truth not with resignation but with humility. You recognize that you can participate fully without controlling everything. As trust returns, your relationship with uncertainty softens. Uncertainty once felt threatening because it reminded you of past loss. Buddhism teaches that uncertainty is the natural state of existence. Nothing is fixed, nothing is guaranteed. When you let go quietly, you stop demanding certainty as a prerequisite for peace. You learn to rest inside the unknown without panic. This resting is not passive. It is alert, present, and open. It is trust expressed as willingness to meet whatever arises. Trusting life again also means trusting yourself again. After deep hurt, self-trust often erodes. You question your judgment. You replay decisions, wondering how you missed the signs. Buddhism teaches that wisdom does not come from never being hurt. It comes from learning through experience. Letting go quietly allows you to forgive yourself for not knowing what you could not have known. You stop punishing yourself for past vulnerability. You recognize that openness was not a flaw, it was a human response. As self-trust returns, you become less rigid. You no longer need to predict everything before you act. You take small steps without demanding full clarity. Buddhism teaches right view, seeing clearly without distortion. Letting go quietly clears the lens. You act from present understanding rather than past fear. This shift restores confidence not as bravado, but as steadiness. Trusting life again changes how you relate to timing. Earlier, you may have rushed healing, anxious to feel normal again. Buddhism teaches patience as wisdom, not delay. Letting go quietly teaches you to respect timing, both yours and life's. You stop forcing resolution. You allow things to unfold. This patience is not waiting passively. It is engaging fully while accepting that outcomes mature in their own time. As trust deepens, you begin to experience life as less adversarial. Instead of seeing challenges as punishments or signs that something is wrong, you see them as movements within a larger flow. Buddhism teaches that suffering and joy are both part of conditioned existence. Letting go quietly allows you to meet both with balance. You stop interpreting every difficulty as a personal failure. This perspective reduces fear and builds resilience. Trusting life again also brings a new relationship with vulnerability. Vulnerability no longer feels like exposure without protection. It becomes openness with discernment. Buddhism does not advocate naive openness. It teaches wisdom paired with compassion. Letting go quietly teaches you when to open and when to pause. You trust your ability to sense what is appropriate. This discernment makes vulnerability safer and more sustainable. As life begins to feel trustworthy again, gratitude emerges naturally. Not forced gratitude that denies pain, but quiet appreciation for moments of ease, clarity, and connection. Buddhism teaches that gratitude arises from seeing conditions clearly. Letting go quietly reveals how many moments of support exist alongside difficulty. This awareness softens the heart. It rebuilds trust in the goodness that still flows through life. Trust also returns in your relationship with effort. You stop trying to micromanage your growth. You trust that showing up with awareness is enough. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not achieved through strain, but through alignment. Letting go quietly aligns you with life's rhythm. You work when work is needed. You rest when rest is needed. This balance fosters confidence that you are moving in harmony rather than against the current. As trust stabilizes, fear loses its authority. Fear still arises, but it no longer dictates your choices. Buddhism teaches that fear is a conditioned response, not a command. Letting go quietly strengthens your capacity to feel fear without obeying it. You move forward gently, not recklessly, but without paralysis. This movement restores vitality. Eventually, trusting life again feels simple. You are no longer asking life to prove itself to you. You engage with what is present. You respond honestly. You adapt when conditions change. Buddhism teaches that trust is not belief in a particular outcome, but confidence in impermanence itself. Letting go quietly allows you to live this teaching rather than merely understand it. In trusting life again, you realize that life was never entirely against you, even in its hardest moments. It was shaping you, refining awareness, loosening attachment. Letting go quietly has revealed this truth without forcing it. Trust returns not as certainty, but as ease. You live with openness, curiosity, and calm. And in this way, letting go quietly becomes not just an act of healing, but a way of walking through life with grounded faith in its unfolding. 13. Letting go quietly is how you become unshakable from within. There is a depth of strength that does not announce itself, that does not need to harden, and that does not rely on control. Buddhism points toward this strength again and again. It is the strength that arises when you no longer cling, no longer resist, and no longer fight life as it unfolds. Letting go quietly is how this strength is formed. It is not dramatic. It is not aggressive. It is steady, rooted, and deeply unshakable. Earlier in life, strength may have meant endurance, holding on longer, pushing through pain, proving resilience by surviving what hurt you. Buddhism does not deny endurance, but it reveals a deeper layer of power beneath it. Endurance without awareness can turn into self-punishment. Letting go quietly teaches a different strength. The strength to stop when stopping is wiser, the strength to release when holding on only causes harm. This strength does not come from ego, it comes from clarity. When you let go quietly, you stop outsourcing your stability. Your emotional state is no longer determined by whether things go your way or whether others behave as you hope. Buddhism teaches equanimity, the capacity to remain balanced amid gain and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. Letting go quietly is how equanimity becomes lived reality. You still feel, but you are no longer thrown off center by every shift in circumstance. This inner steadiness grows slowly. It forms through countless small moments where you choose not to react, not to chase, not to defend. Each time you pause instead of engaging in unnecessary conflict, you strengthen this inner foundation. Each time you allow discomfort to pass without acting from it, you reinforce trust in your own resilience. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes what it practices. Letting go quietly trains the mind in stability. As this strength develops, fear loses its sharpness. Fear once controlled your decisions, convincing you that loss would destroy you or that uncertainty was unbearable. Through letting go, you discover that you can experience fear without collapsing. You can feel uncertainty without losing direction. Buddhism teaches that fear arises from clinging to permanence in an impermanent world. Letting go quietly loosens this clinging. You accept change as natural, not as threat. Becoming unshakable does not mean becoming rigid. In fact, rigidity is a sign of fragility. Buddhism uses the metaphor of water, flexible yet powerful. Letting go quietly makes you more like water. You adapt without breaking. You move around obstacles rather than fighting them. This flexibility is strength refined by wisdom. It allows you to remain open without being overwhelmed. As inner strength deepens, your relationship with others changes. You no longer seek validation to feel secure. Compliments do not inflate you. Criticism does not crush you. Buddhism teaches freedom from praise and blame as a sign of awakening. Letting go quietly cultivates this freedom. You listen when feedback is useful and release it when it is not. Your sense of self remains intact. This unshakable quality also transforms how you face difficulties. Challenges no longer feel like personal attacks or signs of failure. They are conditions arising to be met with awareness and response. Buddhism teaches that suffering is intensified when we identify with it. Letting go quietly allows you to experience difficulty without becoming it. You are not your pain, you are the awareness meeting it. As you continue this path, you notice a quiet confidence emerging. Not confidence rooted in achievement or comparison, but confidence grounded in self-knowledge. You know that whatever arises, you can meet it. You do not need to rehearse defenses or plan every outcome. Buddhism teaches trust in awareness itself. Letting go quietly strengthens this trust. You rely less on strategies and more on presence. This inner strength also brings humility. You recognize that life is larger than personal will. You stop insisting on control and start cooperating with reality. Buddhism teaches humility as wisdom, the recognition of interdependence. Letting go quietly aligns you with this truth. You act responsibly without believing you are solely responsible for everything. This humility lightens the burden you once carried. As you become unshakable, peace becomes less conditional. You no longer need everything to be resolved to feel calm. You can rest in uncertainty. You can hold unanswered questions. Buddhism teaches that peace does not come from certainty, but from acceptance. Letting go quietly allows you to accept life as it is, incomplete and ever-changing. This acceptance brings deep rest. Over time, you realize that this unshakable quality was always within you. It was obscured by attachment, fear, and resistance. Letting go quietly did not create strength. It revealed it. You no longer strive to be strong, you simply are. You move through life with steadiness, compassion, and clarity. In this final stage, letting go quietly becomes less of an action and more of a way of being. You release again and again, not because you are forced to, but because it feels natural. You live with openness without being ungrounded, with compassion without being drained, with confidence without arrogance. Buddhism points to this state as freedom within life. And so, letting go quietly leads you here, not to emptiness, but to fullness, not to detachment from life, but to deep engagement without bondage. You become unshakable not because nothing affects you, but because you no longer cling to what passes. This is the quiet strength of wisdom embodied. This is what it means to heal completely, from the inside out. 14. Letting go quietly is how you finally rest in who you are. There comes a point on the path of healing where striving begins to fall away. Not because life has become perfect, but because the inner struggle has softened. Buddhism points toward this state again and again, a state where the heart no longer argues with itself, where the mind no longer runs in circles searching for certainty, and where the body finally feels permission to rest. Letting go quietly is how you arrive here. It is how you stop trying to become someone else and begin resting in who you already are. For much of life, many people live as if they are incomplete. They believe they must fix themselves, improve themselves, or prove themselves to be worthy of peace. This belief keeps the mind busy and the heart tense. Buddhism gently challenges this illusion. It teaches that the true self is not something to be constructed, but something to be uncovered. Letting go quietly peels away the layers of expectation, comparison, and self-judgment that obscure your natural state. As these layers fall away, rest becomes possible. Resting in who you are does not mean giving up growth or awareness. It means no longer waging war against yourself. You stop treating your flaws as enemies and your emotions as problems to solve. Buddhism teaches compassion toward all states of mind, understanding that each arises due to conditions. When you let go quietly, you allow yourself to be human without constant correction. This acceptance does not make you stagnant, it makes you whole. As this rest deepens, the nervous system begins to recalibrate. For a long time, you may have lived in a state of subtle tension, always anticipating the next challenge or disappointment. Letting go quietly signals safety. The body learns that it no longer needs to brace. Breathing deepens, muscles soften, thoughts slow. Buddhism recognizes the deep connection between mind and body, teaching that liberation is not only mental but embodied. Rest becomes a physical experience, not just an idea. Resting in who you are also transforms your relationship with effort. You stop pushing yourself to perform healing or spirituality. You recognize when effort becomes another form of grasping. Buddhism teaches the middle way, avoiding extremes of forcing and avoidance. Letting go quietly places you on this middle path. You act when action is needed and rest when rest is appropriate. This balance feels intuitive rather than disciplined. As you rest more fully in yourself, comparison loses its grip. You are less concerned with how others are living, healing, or progressing. Buddhism teaches that comparison arises from a misunderstanding of uniqueness. Each being walks a path shaped by different conditions. Letting go quietly clarifies this truth. You honor your own rhythm without measuring it against anyone else's. This freedom from comparison brings a gentle confidence that does not need reinforcement. Resting in who you are also brings a new relationship with identity. You stop clinging to labels and roles that once defined you. The one who struggled, the one who survived, the one who had to be strong. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to identity, reminding us that all identities are provisional. Letting go quietly loosens these identifications. You are not reduced to your past or confined by your story. You are presence itself, aware and responsive. This rest allows authenticity to emerge naturally. You speak more simply. You act more honestly. You no longer feel compelled to perform or impress. Buddhism teaches that authenticity arises when the mind is free from craving and aversion. Letting go quietly removes these pressures. You show up as you are, without embellishment or defense. This authenticity feels light and relieving. As you rest in yourself, relationships shift again. You engage from fullness rather than need. You do not seek others to complete you or validate your worth. Buddhism teaches interdependence without attachment. Letting go quietly allows you to connect without clinging. You enjoy closeness while respecting space. You offer presence without expectation. Relationships become simpler and more nourishing. Resting in who you are also changes how you experience solitude. Solitude becomes a refuge rather than a void. Silence feels supportive rather than lonely. Buddhism values solitude as a space for insight and renewal. Letting go quietly makes solitude accessible. You are comfortable with yourself. You enjoy your own company. This comfort strengthens inner stability. As rest deepens, gratitude becomes effortless. Not gratitude as a practice you force, but gratitude as a natural response to ease. Buddhism teaches gratitude as awareness of conditions that support life. Letting go quietly reveals these conditions more clearly. You notice small comforts, simple moments, ordinary beauty. This awareness enriches daily life. Eventually, resting in who you are feels like coming home. There is no urgency to become different. There is curiosity without pressure. Growth continues, but it is gentle. Buddhism teaches that awakening is not elsewhere. It is here, in this moment, when resistance ends. Letting go quietly ends resistance not by force, but by understanding. In resting fully, you realize that much of your suffering came from trying to outrun yourself. Letting go quietly allowed you to stop running. You stand where you are, grounded and present. You trust that this is enough. Life continues to change, challenges still arise, but your relationship with them is different. You meet them from rest rather than struggle. This is the quiet fulfillment of the path, not escape from life, but ease within it. Letting go quietly has guided you here, to a place where nothing needs to be added or removed. You rest in awareness, in compassion, in simple being, and from this rest, life unfolds with clarity, gentleness, and a peace that feels deeply earned, not through effort, but through release. Letting go quietly is not a single moment, a dramatic decision, or a sharp break from the past. It is a gentle, ongoing return to yourself. Through every stage of release, Buddhism reminds us of one simple truth. Suffering lessens when we stop clinging, and peace deepens when we stop resisting. You did not heal by becoming louder, harder, or more guarded. You healed by becoming more honest, more aware, and more compassionate with your own experience. In learning to let go quietly, you discovered that strength does not need to shout, wisdom does not need to explain itself, and healing does not need an audience. You learned that silence can protect, detachment can free, and self-love can guide you out of suffering without bitterness or blame. Each release, no matter how small, created space. In that space, clarity grew. In that clarity, peace returned. Buddhism teaches that nothing essential is lost through letting go. What falls away are illusions, attachments, and expectations that no longer serve your well-being. What remains is presence. What remains is balance. What remains is the quiet confidence that you can meet life as it is, without clinging to what was or fearing what may come. As you move forward, letting go quietly becomes a way of living rather than a task to complete. You release again and again, with patience and trust. You listen more deeply, you react less. You rest more fully in who you are. Life continues to change, but you are no longer at war with it. You walk with it, aware of its impermanence and open to its unfolding. This is the healing Buddhism points toward. Not perfection, not escape, but freedom within life as it is. When you let go quietly, you heal deeply. And in that deep healing, you remember that peace was never something you had to earn. It was always waiting for you, beneath everything you were holding on to.